welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Mike, today's guest on the podcast is John Slingerland. He's a longtime sailor. By the way, he sailed across the Atlantic, and he has sailed in several Marion, that's Marion, Massachusetts, to Bermuda races. And he's done this in what's called the Marion 1-2 race, where you sail from Marion to Bermuda with two people on the boat, and then you sail back from Bermuda to Marion with just one person on the boat. So that's quite a challenge because the sail takes several days. So whether you're doing it yourself or you're doing it shorthanded with just one other person, there's a lot of challenges there. So he shared some of those experiences and tips and things he's learned along the way. He is also a member of the Blue Water Sailing Club, and we've had a previous guest who discussed that with us. And so we just had a great conversation, and just another great example of a sailor who experiences sailing in some wonderful ways. We had a great chat.
Sounds good, Bela. Yeah, I think listeners will want to look out to hear excellent sailing stories, once about passaging, second about, as you said, sailing clubs, and third, and maybe more importantly, some interesting tips to help figure out how one might have a rich life in retirement, kind of anchored around sailing. Sorry for the bad pun, but right, this idea of having a community and sharing things with people that you care about and care about similar things is an important element, I think, of aging gracefully. I think we can both say that in our advanced years, Bela, and I think this is a cool story about how John kind of built his life post-retirement.
Yeah, those are some great observations, Mike. So let's hop right into my discussion. John, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome everybody. And thank you, Bela, for inviting me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, this should be great. Hey, so let me ask you a question. If you get introduced to somebody who's not a sailor, the whole concept of sailing is sort of foreign to them. And after the introduction, they say to you, John, what's the thing you like most about sailing? How do you answer that question?
Oh, I've had a similar question. What's the most important job on the boat, from somebody who's not a sailor? But yeah, why do we go sailing?
Yeah.
What turns us on about it? The magic of being pushed along by the wind. I think if you reduce it down to the most simplest terms, is just it's a great feeling. And of course, depending on really any boat you're on, it's amazing piece of machinery.
Yes. Oh, great answer. So how did you start sailing? What was your first sailing experience, and when?
Well, I started sailing as a 9-year-old. I was sent to a camp in New Hampshire. It was 2 months in the summer, and I went for 4 summers, and I loved the camp. And and it was a good camp, and it was very militaristic. It was highly organized. And in the afternoon, you could do what you want. And I always chose to go sailing on lake right at the foot of Mount Monadnock, Thorndike Lake, I think it's called. And Mr. Everdale was our counselor for sailing, and he was explaining to me what a joy sailing on the ocean is, which was nothing I ever experienced until I graduated from law school and started dating my wife, who's had a cottage, her family up in Boothbay. So that happened in 1983. The camp started happening in 1966, when I was not a little bit beyond an infant, learning how to swim at the local pond in Wellesley. I'd look across the pond to these sunfishes and sailfishes, and they looked magnificent to me. I was mesmerized by those things. So that was the spark, maybe, right from the get-go. And then, of course, sailing in camp as a 9-year-old up to the next 4 years, that was great. And then I started sailing in Boothbay Harbor, which is, as you probably know, a beautiful spot, on a 32-foot Bristol. That was in 1983. Then my father-in-law, of course, I married Marcia. He died young at the age of 62. He died in 1993. So at that point, I took over this Bristol 32, and my first overnight sail was on 9/11 when the Twin Towers came down. I left Booth Bay half an hour before it happened, and I arrived the following morning in Beverly, not knowing that it had happened. So, and then my first offshore experience was sailing that boat, which was arguably too small to sail to Bermuda, but I did that, and I wound up having a heave to in the Gulf Stream, and then I was hooked. So I did that 3 more round trips to, or a total of 3 round trips to Bermuda on the Bristol 32. And then that boat we got rid of when I took my family of 5 plus a dog up the St. John River in Canada, and it was too small, and my wife was complaining about it. And so I bought a 41-foot Oyster, which is a racer cruiser in St. Martin, and proceeded to do 3 Heineken regattas, 3 Marblehead Halifax races, numerous round trips to the Caribbean in the thing. And then in 2017, I retired. I talked my wife to retire. We're both lawyers. She was an assistant DA. I was self-employed, so it was easier for me to retire. And I wanted to retire more than she did. So I talked her into retiring, and I circumnavigated the North Atlantic Ocean and the Western Mediterranean between 2017 and 2022.
Holy smokes.
And so she would join me in all of the non-offshore passages. She'd show up in Bermuda, Antigua, the Azores. We sailed the Mediterranean together, double-handed. I'd say 50% of the Med we sailed together. And then I've got a host of friends that love to sail and like to sail with me on this boat. So it's not like I'm showing up with new people. They're familiar with the boat, and we work well together. Yeah. So then I thought, okay, how am I going to, I'm a little more enthusiastic about this sailing thing than my wife. How am I going to keep this going? Because I can't give it up. So I'm not exactly sure how I stumbled into the Blue Water Sailing Club, but I joined it. And I figured, you know, if she gets tapped into the social aspect of this club, because we're all in the same boat here. We're, for the most part, either retired or nearing retirement. Same demographics, basically. And yeah, so I figured, okay, I'm going to tie her in this way and keep it going. And so far I've succeeded. I mean, in 2024 and 2025, I constructed a trip for this club that went from Booth Bay up to the Bredor Lakes and Cape Breton. And this was completely over the top, this idea. And I said, we need to leave our boats there because we want to go on and sail Newfoundland the next summer, which we did. And we came back this summer in August. So that was 1 month of sailing at the end of the season in 24 in Nova Scotia, which was superb because there are no lobster traps, and it's like Maine was 100 years ago, is phenomenal. And then Newfoundland is like sailing the fjords of Norway. It's just incredible with these outports and these isolated villages. And so we came back, and that was more like 6 weeks, 1 month in Newfoundland, and then hurry up and get home, which involved 2 overnighters back from Halifax. And these people are not as experienced. So it's a good step for what we're doing now, which is I'm going to lead a trip a year from now from Newport, Rhode Island to Bermuda, St. Martin, and then on down to the Grenada. We take it 2.5 months off in the middle of the winter, and we come back lickety split in 3 big legs, Grenada to St. Martin to Bermuda, and then home. And I'm opening it up to everybody in the club by saying, why don't you come down and charter a boat? You know, do a 2-week one-way charter from St. Lucia to Grenada. So we've already got 5 or 6 boats doing the offshore stuff. And we probably have 5 or 6 at this point doing the chartering. And we'll see where we end up at the end of it.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite a list of adventures and future adventures. I did Halifax to Marion, and then from there down to Baltimore on a friend's boat who was with the Salty Dog sailing group, and they did a Chesapeake Bay up to the Bador Lakes.
Yep.
And then he lost his crew and he needed somebody to help him bring the boat back. And I was that person. And you're right. Nova Scotia, I've never been to Newfoundland, but Nova Scotia is just so charming. It's just a great, great place.
I'd like to see our club make it a regular trip, maybe every other year or possibly every year. Tack it on. We typically have 2 weeks south of the canal in Buzzards Bay. That's great because of the wind. And if you like to ride a bike, those islands, you can't beat riding around on those, and a lot of restaurant work. So that's a certain crowd, and half our membership is down there. And then we do a 2-week cruise in Maine, which of course I'm addicted to Maine. I got a cottage up there, but there's very often no wind. And they're lobster pots. At this point, I don't really want to be sailing around up there when it's dark out and getting hooked up on lobster pots. So I can see adding on a little 2-week trip up to Halifax at the end of, say, a Maine cruise, or in the middle of a Maine cruise. Give these people the option of breaking off from Roke Island or Northeast Harbor and do Nova Scotia. And you could actually do that without an overnighter getting to Nova Scotia via Grand Manan and Yarmouth. Yeah. So and then we do some short weekend trips, a women's cruise. And that's it. Now, what distinguishes us from the Salty Dog situation is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I joined the Salty Dogs once. I sailed from St. Martin to Tortola, and then I was going to join them back to New England. And as it turned out, I was there for the 2 or 3 days of parties, lovely. And then I just took off to Bermuda because they wanted to go to Norfolk without going to Bermuda. And in any event, that kind of is like a party in the beginning, a party at the end, and a passage. It's not a group of club members, a small club of members that know each other that involve a round trip. And so I've now kind of combined passage making with gunk holing. And people like you and me can crew or take their own boats and their own crews on the passages, and then the spouses and friends and family can show up for the gunk holing.
Yeah. Sounds nice. So the club we're talking about is the Blue Water Sailing Club, and you're the Commodore, I think?
I am the Commodore, yep.
So what does, pardon my dumb question, what does being Commodore mean?
Well, every Commodore is completely different than the previous one, and that's a good thing because variety is the spice of life. We only have a 1-year term, and I think most sailing clubs probably have more like a 2-year term. And to become Commodore, you have to first start on the bridge at Rear Commodore, then for a year, then Vice Commodore for a year, and then Commodore. So Rear Commodore is in charge of our land events. So we're a virtual club. We own nothing. We have no clubhouse, but we have a yearbook, and we all know each other, and we have land events. Off season, we go to pub nights, and we go to concerts, and we do seminars, and anything you can think of that brings us together. Some of them are in person, some of them are by Zoom, etc. Then Rear Commodore, you're in charge of soliciting people to lead cruises. And I've kind of described the cruises that we do. And then Commodore is in charge of basically managing everything. And what it has been in the past is a lot of Zooming in the off season. An executive committee Zoom, which would be the 3 bridge officers, the treasurer, and the secretary once a month. And then the following week, the board, which is an additional 9 people. And you go on to the board for 3 years, and then you're qualified at least after 1 year of being on the board, you're qualified to be considered for Rear Commodore, and you move up from there. So I run the Zoom meetings. So I'm in charge of 20 people for 60 minutes and trying to get something done. And we meet we meet twice a year, in the spring and in the fall. At recently, it's been the Danvers Port Yacht Club up here in Beverly, or Danvers, and somewhere south of the canal. We have a dinner. The fees to join this club were $150. They used to be something like $75 or $90, but and we've now increased them to $175 a year. So basically nothing. And the initiation fee is $200, one-time initiation fee. If you don't know anybody, that's great, but you do need to eventually get 3 people to sponsor you. So that, and at that point, the board meets and we vote you in. You do have to have a boat with a minimum water line of 20 feet.
All right.
So that's become somewhat controversial, and I made it controversial. And initially, as a board member or as a Rear Commodore, I wanted to see that go away. I said, why don't we just admit anyone who's interested in sailing? Because these people will be crew, and if they join our club without a boat, they're really going to go on these cruises or do land events, or why would they otherwise be paying $150?
Right.
But now I've rethought my position completely, Bella, and I'm thinking, my God, maybe it's a good idea to keep the 20-foot minimum water line, because it makes our club very elite. You're talking about people that have to actually own one of these contraptions, and buying them is okay, but maintaining them, it costs money. So you've really winnowed down the field to people that all have the same skin in the game. And traditionally, our club was founded in 1959, and within 2 years, 2 guys met sailing in Bermuda and concocted the Marion Bermuda Race, which back then was entirely celestial, an informal cruising race, unlike the Newport Bermuda Race. And our club had a very strong tradition, and was a co-sponsor along with the Beverly Yacht Club, and still is, of that race. So at one point, we'd have 20 boats in our club entering that race. And now we're down to 3. I think a few years, it's every other year. So before we were down to 3, I think we had 5, 6, or maybe even 7. So we have some serious sailors in this club, and a strong tradition that we're proud of. I'm not really a racer, although I've done these Heineken regattas and the Marblehead Halifax race. I just like to go cruising, and I don't mind racing. It's fun, but I've tapped into a group of people that have a wide variety of experience and interest, and it's very special. I can't think of another sailing club that's quite like this one.
Yeah.
And you can kind of view it as a retirement home. Not a nursing home. I joined the Booth Bay Harbor Yacht Club, and the launch driver said I was unloading my boat for 2 weeks, having been away in Newfoundland for 2 years. And he said, John, this is a nursing home. And that was completely unfair. But most of the boats in that club are power boats, not all of them. And they've got some serious sailors too, and some great tradition as well. But what I mean by a retirement home is that we're all in the same age group, more or less. And this is what we're doing. And the types of trips I'm leading, you can't go on unless you're either retired or close to retirement or self-employed. And you got to have some money to buy a boat and maintain it and to do these things. So it's, I'm not ashamed of thinking of it as a retire. And people get worried because the numbers are shrinking. We have about 170, 160 members in this club. And it's been fairly steady. There's been some contraction, and I think all these clubs have contracted over the years, somewhat.
Sailing has contracted, right?
Yeah.
From its heyday in the 80s. Just look at the number of sailboat manufacturers that existed in the 80s, and look at the number that exists today. That tells you the numbers are going down.
Yeah. That's right. Hinckley went out of business and then came back with a picnic boat, and I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. When you're organizing one of these cruises that you talked about, what's sort of I've participated in those types of cruises, so I've taken advantage of it, right? It's almost like going on one of those bus tours, except you're driving the bus or you're driving your own bus, right? So everything's sort of taken care of. So what's involved in sort of organizing, let's say, one of these longer trips that you've done or organized?
Well, there are different approaches to organizing these trips, and there are different types of trips. One of the former Commodores, if you go back 4 or 5 steps, Dennis McKay, he led a trip up the St. John River. I did that trip with Points East. Bernie Coyne had done that for 20 years. Highly organized. You go into these yacht clubs and it would be organized in advance. There'd be a cocktail hour and hors d'oeuvres and dinner, and everything would be planned out in minutia. Less so with these main cruises and the cruises in south of the canal. But they are organized to the extent that people need to make dinner reservations or say that they're in or they're out. And you go to certain places, whether it's a museum or something like that, and pay your own way. I came into this with a slightly different experience. I was not indoctrinated in those cruises because I hadn't been a member of this club. I've been sailing on my own my whole life. So having come back from the Mediterranean in particular, I liked having no game plan and going slow. I'd stay in places for weeks at a time, and then I'd hook up with you find other people very knowledgeable, and you start doing things with them and discovering things and meeting people that you wouldn't otherwise meet if you're doing it completely on your own. So I've done a kind of a mix on these expedition type trips, and I've assigned for Nova Scotia, there were only 4 boats. In Newfoundland, we had 5. This Caribbean trip, although it's much grander in scale, will have more boats. But anyway, I do a captain of the day, which our club has done a captain of the day, but I do it right before the trip ever begins. I assign a day or two to a different boat and say, okay, you're running the show. You tell us what we need to know, where the rocks are, if there are any, what the weather's going to be on the morning radio call at 8. I'll start the call and greet everybody and try to say something witty, and then hand it off to and I'll start the cruise doing it myself, so you can break the ice and everybody feels comfortable with it. And then they can, for example, we had a French couple on this Nova Scotia Newfoundland trip. They were in charge of, among other places, Saint Pierre, which is a French island. The Rosserts, they're French. They have a house in France. They're both doctors. They're going to do this Caribbean cruise. He said, John, you got to lead a cruise to the Caribbean. I said, really? Okay, sure. And now now they've got crew from the Nova Scotia trip. Some of these guys that were captaining their own boats and other guys that were crewing, all very capable guys. He's loaded his 42-foot Hallberg Rossi, so he can take 4 or 5 people. With really good people to help him do this. And he's now going to go, he's going to break away on the return from Bermuda and sail across the ocean to France with a bunch of these characters. So in Saint Pierre, he was in charge, and his French is superb, obviously. And he really did a good job. He and his wife pulling a lot of different things together, going on a puffin boat trip and other things like that. So I distribute the responsibility around to the various boats so that everybody gets involved, and it's much more fun, and you've got much more talent than just trying to do it all yourself.
Right.
And everybody chips in, and we also do a group WhatsApp. So we're in constant communication with each other 24/7 if we choose to be on WhatsApp, and every morning at 8 a.m. we have a live call, and off we go. Or I like, and the other thing I like to do, which is maybe different than what the club has generally done, is for every day we sail, generally speaking, I want a day off. You will land somewhere. The whole point is to go ashore and check it all out, enjoy it, be mellow, and
exactly.
meet people. Yeah.
So how do you when you're doing something like to the Bahamas, how do you decide which places to stop at? How do you figure that part out?
Well, my trip this coming 2026, 27, the Caribbean Challenge Cruise, it's not going to the Bahamas. I've never gone to the Bahamas. It's going to go from Newport, Bermuda, St. Martin, and then we'll go around St. Martin to Anguilla, Tintamere, St. Bart's, and that will be a 1 week for people that want to charter. They can charter for 1 week and start and end in the same place, and then we'll just continue on down to the other islands, St. Kitts, Montserrat, Guadeloupe, all of that. So how did I figure that trip? Because I've done it before. I've gone to all of these places for the most part. There's some of the places between St. Vincent and Grenada I have not gone to, but I've done that trip in both directions. So half of them I've gone to, and there are some that I have not gone to. So, and then just for the hell of it, I was thinking, okay, I've mapped this thing out. Let's go online and see what these charter companies have for their proposed itineraries. If you want to charter, they go on moorings, and they'll give you half a dozen different proposed routes. And the one that I did around St. Martin is exactly what the charter companies do. And the one that I take down from St. Lucia to Grenada is also in line with the charter companies, and the CC, what is it? The Cruising Club of America, the CCA has a trip that tracks the itinerary that I set forth in the Grenadines as well. So, but I'd say 20% of the places I've not gone to, and that's great. I like going to new places, and yeah, so I'll do my, you got to get the cruising guides. You can, and that's the other thing. The year before the cruise is you have a great time reading up on in the cruise books and online, and but you stumble into things, and it's a mistake to be locked into something. For example, sailing through the Med, we're going through the Aeolian Islands on the northeastern corner of Sicily en route to the Amalfi Coast, and we get to Stromboli, the lighthouse of the Mediterranean. It's actively blowing. The tourists are no longer allowed to climb up the mountain, and it's the Aeolian Music Festival once a year, and they've got this band on a boat and another boat full of speakers, and every sailboat you can imagine is out there, and it was magnificent. You just stumble into these things, and also these what are they called, farmers markets, or well, now I'm talking more Mediterranean than anything else, because though they're spectacular over there, but same goes with the coast of Nova Scotia. You don't know necessarily what's going to happen when you get into port, but when you're dealing with a group of boats, people collectively find out a lot of stuff quickly. And
I think I'm similar to you. The whole idea of cruising is the adventure. It's the exploration. It's not knowing what's around the corner.
Exactly.
And on purpose, not knowing what's around the corner. Right.
That's right. And then superimpose that land experience on the sailing itself. You don't know what the hell's going to happen when you sail to Bermuda. I mean, you do as much as you can. We hire Chris Parker as do the Salty Dogs, and I've used him a lot in the past, and he's very reasonable, and that's very sensible to use Chris Parker. But back in the day, I'd just be on the single sideband with that gentleman in Toronto, Herb Helfinger, who eventually quit. He provided his service for nothing, and at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock every afternoon, you get on his roll call and he'd tell you what you needed to know. But out there, the weather can change. I mean, coming back across the Atlantic Ocean, it took 24 days. After the first 7 days, we lost our engine and we lost our generator. So that meant that we had to hand steer that boat. We had a wind power for electrical generation, and we had solar. Well, we had no engine, we had no generator. So, and then we ran into a storm for 3.5 days. So it was challenging, and it was also okay. I mean, the seas were the challenge there was the cross sea, the huge seas, but we had a cross sea coming in off the starboard quarter as well as straight from behind. You can't turn around. But the waves were long, and it was a full moon, and four of us, we kept the watch system on, two off every 4 hours, but it was combat conditions, so it'd be 20 minutes on the wheel. You'd be switching off with your partner every 20 minutes, and
Yeah,
it was a great experience. Yeah, not
excellent.
one that you could avoid or anticipate, really.
Yeah, but but the point being is it's one that you should be prepared for.
Yes.
Which
So
leads me to my next question.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
how do you, when you get ready for one of these long trips, how do you prepare your boat? Do you have like a checklist of things that you go through, or talk to me a little bit about getting the boat ready for going to Bermuda, from Marion to Bermuda? What do
Well,
you
at
do?
this point, at the end of every year, my boat constantly breaks down. So all of these places I've sailed into or out of without an engine working. But at the end of every year, I go to a very good and very expensive yard when I'm in Maine. Of course, I've kept my boat all over the place. So I have a long list of things that need to be upgraded or fixed every year when I'm in a good spot. When I'm in, say, somewhere in the Mediterranean, those guys know they're not going to see you as soon as you pull out of the harbor and hang a right. So, half the stuff is good and half the stuff isn't, but that's life. The checklist, before doing my transatlantic, I wanted to know about my rig. And I mean, I just have to, and I'm not mechanically inclined, so I have to rely on people, but I have a good sense of who to listen to and who not to. And the bottom line on my rig was these riggers would come out and go, look, John, if your rig is more than 10 years old, none of us are going to be able to tell you whether it's any good or not. I mean, we could take it off and x-ray all of these things, and it costs you more for us to do that than to just replace your rig. So that's what I did. I replaced my rig, and it was less expensive than you'd think. Before I did my first Bermuda trip on the Bristol 32, there was a local guy I knew in Boothby. I said, geez, Mike, what do I need to do? He said, add a inner forestay and a hanked-on staysail. And the best advice I ever got, I'd never go offshore without an inner forestay, which I make removable, and it's a hank-on. A lot of people have a roller furling on not only their forestay, but the inner forestay. That's just one more thing that can get screwed up. Plus, I also want to put on my storm jib on that inner forestay. If the staysail's too much, I want to go for a storm jib on that inner forestay. And then I not obviously, but I've got 3 reefs in the main. Well, to do this type of sailing, you need a trysail, half the square footage of your triple reef main, and it's not attached to the boom. So if you lose your gooseneck or your boom vang or whatever, it doesn't matter. You got you do enough of this type of sailing, you actually use this stuff, and it's fantastic. The boat was going 15 knots. At that point, we weren't really saying we were surfing. I mean, what's the hull speed on a Oyster 41 is probably 8.5 knots, but we were under control because we had the proper sails. So that's the big thing. And you threw hulls and your hose clamps, and you got to bring, you really should bring spare parts for everything on your engine, everything, and spare toilet thing. Spare this and spare that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And when you get ready for, let's say, a planned 10-day trip, how do you provision? How do you decide on how much food to bring with you? Food and water. Do you have a water maker?
Yeah, I have a water maker that came with the boat, and I'm replacing it this year. I bought this boat, as I said before, in 2012 down in St. Martin from a large Italian gentleman who sailed it a little bit in the Caribbean. He bought it from a 55-year-old Irish barrister in the UK. It's a UK-built boat. And that guy from the UK had sailed it across the ocean and put in a water maker before he did that sail. I think he was a very competent sailor with competent crew. He did die in the passage. He got hit with a storm and hit his head on the winch and died 5 days later.
Oh.
But that was very sad indeed, and that's why the boat was sold to the Italian in St. Martin. But so it's a European powered boat. So I added American, what is it, 50 hertz and something else hertz. So I got both European and American AC power. But that water maker was a European powered 220 thing, which required a portable Honda generator because their Fisher Panda built-in thing was not serviceable. I've now replaced that water maker, and I've done it not necessarily because I really need it, but because it will make life more palatable for my wife and my daughter-in-law. Because if you can allow people to take a shower every day, you're way ahead of the game. Otherwise, it's I have a foot pedal pump where you wash your dishes in salt water. You can use a bucket over the side too in the cockpit. That's just as good and arguably better. Provisioning is down to a science. I mean, when we left Palma, Majorca, bound for the Gibraltar, I had a guy on the dock provision that boat in 1 hour. And there were 4 or 5 of us on that boat for a lengthy period of time. Meanwhile, I was out on the boat troubleshooting the diesel engine with my mechanic. And so you go like a whirlwind. He went around that store and got everything we needed. I have 3. Got up to 3 big coolers, good coolers on the deck. This is a 13-foot, 10-inch beam on Avoset, and it's a flush deck. So I've got a massive amount of deck space. So I therefore have the ability to put 3 really big coolers, one in front of the mast and one on either side, along with all the jugs of fuel and water on that boat, and still have plenty of room to run around. So there's a lot of food there. My refrigerator down below is small, and it does make ice. I can make enough ice for a robust round of cocktails every day.
The key word being robust.
Yeah. Large ice cubes and 2 trays. It's not bad. And it will also freeze anything that you put under that inner semi-ovular thing in there or next to it. Milk, vegetables will freeze and go bad right away in that fridge. I leave it on all the time. I have enough electrical power to be able to leave that thing on. So I also take, say, when I went transatlantic, I took enough bottled water so that if my water maker blew up, it wouldn't be a problem. And of course it did. I mean, I lost my electrical power, so I still had plenty of water.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you learn from these longer cruises is self-sufficiency and sort of asking yourself, okay, if this breaks, what am I going to do? If that breaks, what am I going to do? Because like losing your water maker, you run out of water. That's a serious situation.
That's right. You got to carry enough water. So you got to assume you're going to lose everything. So you got to have enough batteries to run your handheld GPSs. If your chart plotter blows up, you got to have you probably should have a, nav lights, manual set that you can physically put on your boat and run off of batteries. I've got the tricolor, which is, you definitely want it at the top of the mast when you're offshore. And in addition, I've got deck lights on that boat. So I got redundancy there, plus the thing that I can bring up with batteries in it. For the Caribbean Challenge cruise, I have imposed a rule, and I've copied exactly what the Salty Dogs have done, because I think they've done very well on this. They have a requirement. If you want to sail with them to Bermuda, you have to have completed, the captain of the boat has to have completed on his boat double overnighter. before they'll say you're qualified to go to Bermuda. And if you're going on to the Azores, you have to have done 3 consecutive overnighters. And of course, you will have done that if you make it to Bermuda and are still alive. Right. You will have made that next thing for the Azores. So I said, I like that. I'm going to make that. I have one character who joined our club who has built his own catamaran. Now, he is obviously extremely talented mechanically, but I mean, I can't, and his experience is not as thorough, he's got limited experience. So, for him in particular, I think this is a good requirement that he goes out for a double overnighter and see what happens. Now, our Marion Bermuda Race thing, oh no, that it's mission creep. Over the years, all the technology and at this point, I think you not only have to have a sat phone, but you got to call home twice. Call the office twice a day. Oh my God! And that's just the beginning of it. And you got to go to the safety at sea thing, which is these are really good. You can't possibly say they're not good. They add safety, but they create a barrier of entry for those that want to get into that race. It's going to cost you $30,000 just to comply with all of the equipment requirements and inspections that are on their own. They're good, but they create a barrier. Right. And I would argue they also create, for some people, somewhat of a placebo effect, so that it's the inexperienced person, and there are plenty of them that do the salty dog thing, for example, or the ARC, because that's why they're there in a group. I did those things on my own because I didn't want to get into a mass, traffic jam. But the psychology of the thing is they feel safer in the group, which is somewhat arguable, because as soon as you leave the harbor and you're out in the ocean, you're on your own. Of course, it's good to have the tracking. It's good to have the Starlink I'm adding to my boat. I had an Iridium pilot. You got all these things. All the communication is amazing. So I've added that 2-night requirement to my trip rather than imposing the safety at sea. And we do the NORS, the Northeast Ocean Racing Symposium, also excellent. The guys that sail on my boat do both of those things, and they say they're fantastic. I've done the safety at sea thing a couple times, and I've had to be inspected because of the Marblehead Halifax race. But I've decided, you know what? This 2-night overnight thing, if you had to pick one or the other, I think the Salty Dogs have it right. I think you have to say to the captain, you got to go out there for 2 nights. You can go and sit in the classroom all you want, but you know what? I'm more interested in having you show up with some experience like that before you go. Yeah.
So that brings up my next question. When you're getting ready to go on these trips, or let me put it a different way. If someone says to you, hey, John, I'm getting ready to go on a 4 or 5 day overnight passage somewhere. What advice do you give them for selecting crew? What do you look for in crew?
Well, that's the trickiest part of the whole thing, I think, because almost regardless of who you're talking about, you could get as a crew a former Commodore, as I have had several times, and one of them was outstanding and the other one was not so good. So these people may or may not know much, even if they're a Commodore or a club. These people, I've had a friend who's had prior experience sailing across the ocean, who, based on crewing for me on a number of these offshore trips, is not, when it hits the fan, that there's a problem. He's got a problem. And chain of command being one of them. Everybody reacts differently when they're under stress. So there are things that you simply can't know or anticipate or predict when you're looking at somebody, and even reading his resume, which might be on paper quite good. So the safest way to go about getting crew, I would say, is to use the same crew and to test drive the guy, and it goes both ways. I mean, if you're crewing for a captain, there are plenty of captains that don't know what the hell they're doing, and you don't want to be on their boat. And so it's a hazardous operation in either direction. So the best thing to do is to go on a shorter trip first and vet your crew, and your crew vets you. And I've done it long enough, and I have all these guys. It's not a problem. But then you can use some people. I've used Hank Schmidt, Offshore Passage Opportunities. And I've joined his group more for the social aspect of it than anything else, sailing from Newport to Bermuda and then down to St. Martin. And his group was originally formed, if I understand it correctly, to help boat owners, swan owners, get their boats down there for the winter. So that his group would involve some professional captains, with or without the owners, and then in my case, I just kind of glommed onto the thing. I don't think it's that restricted anymore, and I'm not sure he's still doing it. He's got grandchildren. I think he's out of that game, but he's still running a crew opportunity thing. So only twice have I used Hank. I got a guy with dual Turkish American citizenship who was a mechanical engineer. He was very, very good. I liked him a lot, and I think he helped me sail from Bermuda to the St. Martin. And then at that point, I was on my own with him, and he came over to the Med and helped me sail some of the Med. Another time when I was coming back out of the Med to come home, I was short one person. I thought I was. It turned out I wasn't. But I called Hank, and somewhere in the Mediterranean, I said, I need somebody down here now. And within 24 hours, some woman who was sailing in the North Sea said, I'm there. And by that time, one of my people had called me and said, no, they're in. I didn't need her. But so my one experience with Hank was quite good. But that's not always the case. I've heard that people that have not had a good experience with that. So just test drive your person before going out on a five-nighter, or on my boat I need 4 people. I'm old. I'm at the point where I've got to put a power winch on and do a few other things because I'm not strong enough to pull that sail up and down all the time. So I want 3 strong guys in addition to myself. So there's some safety, considerable safety, if you've got at least one other guy who is capable. You can, and I've intentionally brought people that don't know anything, and then people that are utterly useless. I mean, from the spread the game. I've knowingly taken, knowing that I have a deep bench, I can absorb that. I mean, I had an old law school friend who didn't know port from starboard. That was fine. He went as a passenger. But at this point, I wouldn't do it again because I'm not getting any younger. So I want all 3 of my guys to be solid.
Well, I think your advice of test driving first, going for a short cruise, even if it's maybe just one overnight, I think that's excellent advice. I think the other part I really liked of what you said is having at least one person who's really, really good. So you're not the only person on the boat that has a lot of experience, because you can get incapacitated.
That's right. And on 2 occasions, I have been incapacitated briefly, but definitely incapacitated. And on both those occasions, I had friends that were doctors. One was hypothermia and the other one was acute back pain. So between the ER, he ran the ER department at a hospital. He hit me with all kinds of oxycodone. I don't know what he gave me. And then somebody else on the experienced guy in the crew had the prednisone. Is that what it is? Prednisone?
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
I think that's what it was. And the next morning I woke up, it was like nothing had ever happened, but I did have back surgery after that. So there's some logic in what I've done here with the club, because this trip to Nova Scotia involved an overnighter to get from Matinicus to Shelburne, Nova Scotia, around the corner there past Cape Sable. As it turned out, it was glass. It was calm. So we powered all the way. That was great. I mean, my wife, everybody, we had mixed crews. That was great. Coming back from Halifax, it was a 2-nighter. It was a real sail. It was great. So that was a nice first opportunity for people to get more experience before tackling this Caribbean trip.
Yeah.
Sailing to or back from Halifax is a good warm-up. Going back to your question about crew, get your crew to help you sail to or back from Halifax before you start thinking about crossing the Gulf Stream going to Bermuda, because that's a whole nother ball game, especially if you're doing it in November.
Yeah.
Which we are.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think this notion of doing an overnight is really important. Both my sons, I have two sons, and neither one has been on an overnight. And I've been trying to figure out with their work schedules and stuff, you know, how can we go do a cruise someplace? And I've come to the conclusion that I keep my boat on Narragansett Bay. So, you know, come on down to the boat on a Friday night. We'll get on the boat. We'll just head south for a day and a half, and then we'll turn around and come north for a day and a half. And you don't have to have a destination to sort of get an overnight under your belt, is my point. You can just go in whichever direction you want to go in and turn around and come back.
Yeah.
And you get that over, because there is something about, I think, you know, it's dark out. You can't see anything.
You're learning through experience to sail on your instruments.
That's right.
At night.
That's right.
And also fog.
Yes. Yeah.
So actually, it's almost easier to sail at night, because if it's not foggy, because you've got lights that you can deal with, and your GPS is a wonderful thing, and so is your radar. Yeah. But it's also really good to go.
It's nicer if you're offshore and there's no land lights around. It's much more, I find it much more challenging, you know, when I'm a mile and a half offshore and there's lights all over the place.
No, I agree with that. And especially in New England. So when I do the overnight, whether I'm going from Beverly to Boothbay or back, or more recently, I joined one of our cruises in Edgartown, and I was coming from Boothbay. So I went offshore far enough to get out of the lobster traps, because that's a bloody nuisance. I mean, one of the previous times I was going into Isle of Shoals to drop the anchor at 2:00 in the morning. I was tired. I said, let's stop. And we're going in there. We hooked a lobster pot. I go, oh my God, pull up the sails. And I tacked. And we had to continue on sailing down to the Annisquam River.
Yeah.
Because we lost, those traps are a disaster. And also, I've got bad vision now. I suddenly lost a lot of my great vision. And late in the afternoon, if you're sailing going from Maine back to Massachusetts, the angle of the sun on the water in the mid to late afternoon, you can't see those lobster pots very well.
Yeah.
So,
hey, John, we've been chatting 50 minutes now, so I want to start wrapping this up.
Yeah.
So, is there anything I haven't asked you that you'd like to share with our listeners before we wrap it up?
Oh wow. Not really. No. But everybody who's listening should think about, if they're into one of these adventure cruises and or otherwise. There's a wide variety of cruises you and I have just been talking about.
Yeah.
And our club offers them all. Other clubs offer some things that are a little different.
Yep. So Blue Water Sailing Club.
Blue Water Sailing Club. We're online. We've got a website that's pretty good, and we have a weekly newsletter called The Beacon, where we announce things that are coming up that you can subscribe to for nothing. We have a Blue Water Sailing Club Facebook discussion page, which will allow people to join and see what we're doing. We post videos and pictures of our trips and everything. And some of the things that I've been talking about, I've posted, so you could see it there. And it's all good. We love to have people join and make our family a little bigger.
Very good, John. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. It's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. That was great. It's fun.
Yeah, Bela, what a great interview. It was interesting hearing about John's life and his perspective on sailing clubs and all the racing that he's done. What were your main takeaways?
Well, John is an adventurous guy, that's for sure. But one of the key takeaways for me is really one of the nice things about sailing is that can be enjoyed throughout a broad spectrum of activities. You can sail on a little boat on a little lake, a little boat that you can throw on top of your car, and you can just have a great time. Or you can, we've had guests on the show who are soloed across the Atlantic Ocean by themselves. We had a guest who's going to solo around the world by themselves. So there's this broad spectrum of ways that you can enjoy this wonderful sport. And the other thing is, several times sailing clubs have come up in our podcast. And it's a great way to mix sailing with meeting people and meeting people who have the same interest as you. So I think that's, really kind of neat. And, you can do this from really hardcore sailing, sort of John's more sort of on the hardcore end of the spectrum, to sort of a much more relaxed way of cruising around the bay or cruising around the lake. So I think that's one of the wonderful things about it.
Yeah, agreed. One of the things that kind of came to my head when I was listening to you interview John is, do you think sailors are born or made? Like, do some people just have a passion for this in their blood, or does this come from kind of experiences and learning and things like this? I mean, we've talked to a lot of people over the years. What's your sense of the patterns?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. I'll take a slight different twist on that. So many of the people we have talked to, they got introduced to sailing through their family. Their parents sailed, or one of their parents sailed, or something like that. Interestingly enough, as people know, I've been sailing a long time, and I also fly fish. And my father did neither one of those things. And ski. So there's three big things in my life. There's skiing, there's fly fishing, and there's sailing. And all three of those I sort of acquired on my own. And so I don't know where that comes from, but I think the important thing is try to expose yourself to various different opportunities. And some of them will click and stick and others won't. And I don't think, I had to talk to a real, good psychiatrist to kind of figure out why they stick and why they don't. But it's just, so I can't say they're born or they're made. Clearly there's something about these various different recreational activities that we do that provide some form of pleasure to you. And that's what makes it click. Whether it's some calming element of it, or whether it's an adrenaline element of it, that sort of depends on your personality, I'm sure. So I just think, to me, I've always, and I tried to do this with our kids, is try to expose them to a bunch of different things and let them figure out what sticks and what doesn't. But try to give them a bunch of different opportunities and just see where it goes. So anyway, that's sort of my 2 cents on it. What do you think about that, Mike?
I don't know. I don't have a strong feeling about it. I guess I think we've seen a lot of different things, like people who started doing it when they were kids and they knew they wanted to do it. Is that because, like art or music, right? Some people have a natural gift for it, right? And I think there might be some element to that. Like some people are really good at reading the winds, right? Or some people just have a natural intuition about what the water is doing. And I think there might be something there that's kind of, you're cognitively good at this, right? That the way your
Sure.
brain is wired helps you process this information in a way that makes sense, right? Or even the hand-eye coordination, right? I mean, I think that there are some people that are good at that, but I think it's probably also you can develop these knowledge and skills, right? More like you. But it's interesting, like I think your fly fishing and your skiing and your sailing all require there's some things that are in common there, right? I mean, thinking about winds and weather is important. Hand-eye coordination is important, right? Even I think things like balance is super important, right? So I think there's some commonalities in your three
Sure.
passions.
Sure.
But I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting to look back. I mean, again, you and I are older than I think a lot of our listeners. But looking back on how you develop the things that you've enjoyed doing and enjoyed spending time and meeting people and have been meaningful, right? And I don't know if there's rhyme or reason, but I'm sure there's some element that you kind of have to have some pathways that you're naturally good at this. I think otherwise
Right.
you're fighting against it your whole life. So there's some knowledge and skills that fit with how your brain works. But I think it's got to also be experiential and relationship based, and
Right.
the kind of it gives you satisfaction from a kind of a pleasure standpoint.
Yeah.
I don't know. It'd be interesting. It'd be an interesting episode to maybe get some psychologists on here, or psychiatrists on here to talk about that. But I don't know. Another question for you. We've talked about sailing clubs with our guests, and our guests tend to be older, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, being older people ourselves. And I think I've heard of, younger people going to sailing clubs too, but is there something out there for people like your son and daughter-in-law's age? Are there certain sailing groups that are more attuned to that? Is that more the racing crowd or the cruising crowd is older? I don't know. What does that look like from your perspective?
So I think it's like most clubs, they sort of tend to migrate to a certain demographic, just sort of naturally, maybe not on purpose, but just sort of sometimes inadvertently. I know that many big cities have sort of public sailing clubs or public sailing programs. So these are really tailored for people who live. I know Boston has a really good one. And even Providence, where we're near where we keep our boat, there's a sailing club. So it's called a sailing club, but it's really a city sponsored sailing program where you can go get checked out in a boat, and then you can basically go out and borrow the boat for 2 hours or something. And these are little day sailing boats and stuff. I think the demographic for those tends to be younger than sort of your traditional yacht club. And people think of yacht clubs as sort of an older demographic. And oftentimes they are, because sometimes they cost a lot of money to join them. Right. So I think there's a broad spectrum. I know close to me, there's a sailing club on Saratoga Lake, which has a broad spectrum of members. It has members my age, and it has, young families as members, and it has a youth sailing program. The nice thing about many of these sailing clubs is they have youth sailing programs that are tailored towards, teens and preteens, to get them out sailing and to kind of build up that program. Of course, one of the challenges with a lot of these clubs is if you have these youth sailing programs, once many of those kids graduate from high school, they leave to go to college, and then sometimes they leave to get a job someplace. So there's this break in continuity. But I think wherever you go, if you do a little bit of searching, you'll be able to find some sort of sailing club that can meet your needs.
Neat. So that might be also an interesting thing to think about in future episodes too, is to try to find some places where like this, and maybe kind of speak to the younger demographic a little bit.
Yeah.
About things that they can join and do. Interesting.
Yeah. Excellent. So what do you think, Mike? Time to wrap this one up?
Yeah, absolutely. Listeners, thanks for joining us for yet another episode. We hope you found our conversation with John Slingerland interesting and thought-provoking as we did. As always, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
And if you enjoyed the podcast, hit that like button on your favorite podcasting application. You can also find the podcast on YouTube now. And if you know of someone that would make a good guest on the show, let us know. So that's it for today's episode. Hope to see you out there on the water soon. So signing off from snowy and cold upstate New York. See you all soon.
And from over here in Münster, Germany, where, what are we recording this? Middle of December, and it's 51 degrees Fahrenheit, but cloudy and kind of gloomy. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. Auf Wiedersehen.